Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, glad you're back on the Investigative Journal on this Monday, October 16th, 2017 day on our calendar. Wow, another week on the Investigative Journal. We're going on almost 13 years now reporting what we call the Vatican-led New World Order. And I'm going to get off the subject a little bit today. And I want to go to those wildfires in Northern California. And I strongly advise taking serious note of what this article has to say. And think microwave weaponry, not just the traditional weaponry that have been used in tactics of war before. This is real, and this is a real arsenal, and conventional artillery will be no protection. What you're going to read in this article is only a small part of what they have planned, or I should say what you're going to hear. I'm going to read it, I think. But anyway, this is from Joseph Farrell. And before I get to that, let me mention there's over 40 people have been killed so far in Northern California in those wildfires, devastating to Napa Valley and other places, and 400 missing. So you know the death toll is going to rise on those fires. But this is what Joseph Farrell had to say, and he says, "This has certainly been a bad week for news. Las Vegas shooting and fires in Northern California. In fact, as I sit down to write this in the wee hours of the morning, I heard a brief news report on the radio that some of the bodies of the victims are so badly charred and unrecognizable that they are having to be identified from dental records, tattoos, and other distinguishing features. Add to this a small hill of articles I received about it this week from readers of this website. As one might expect, many of these articles raise questions about the origin of these fires, arson or even terrorist arson, have been argued by a few sites. Here's one such site in a brief article. You'll have to scroll down a bit when you reach this link to the article, Fires in California Were Not Wild, They Were Caused. And first in the article's author believes that the fires are the result of, you guessed it, weaponized weather of a particular nasty sort. Weather weapons work by using multiple transmitters to create a collision zone where differently phased EM waves cancel out each other and drop their electrical potential into the air, which is a semiconductor where they cancel." Well, folks, let me stop there. It might be, a little bit difficult, but what they're doing is charging, everything is energy, think of it that way. And they have figured out a way, like Tesla did, to charge that energy and actually increase its electrical potential. Which, in a sense, what happens when you increase electrical potentials? It can create heat. Heat can cause what? Fire. But anyway, so it's an equivalent of biasing a transistor. Semiconductors won't simply break down and start conducting just because a bias field is applied. In order for them to conduct in a controlled fashion, they need a doping agent. In silicon, the doping agents are arsenic and boron. In air, the doping agent is most likely whatever is in the chemtrails, barium, mercury, etc. The ionosphere is the power supply, and the Earth is the ground. Think of it that way. Everything in between the ionosphere and the ground will heat up. If enough voltage is applied to a semiconductor, it will suddenly discharge in one burst. This is seen in the air as lightning. The weather geoengineering systems try to avoid this, but this time around in California, the effects of excess voltage were readily observed by many, many people, and it manifested itself in more than one way. He claims, this guy that's writing this, that the way people were affected by this alleged weapon were as follows, though notably no actual names or interviews are provided. So let's listen to what he had to say. Evidently, the people running the geoengineering systems have become more bold, like a thief that steals more and more and more, and more the thief gets away with, the more he keeps stealing. The same is happening with weather warfare. And this time around in California, they got bold enough to push the system hard enough so that the effects of the system in use were easily observed. 1. Some people got heart palpitations from having their bodies charged. 2. Many people saw electrical flashes that made no thunder in perfectly clear blue sky. And worse, some people even saw a small bloom of sparks everywhere in the air around them. 3. Most damning, people are reporting that their electronics malfunctioned before the fires hit, with the most pronounced and spoken about malfunction being a hotel, the Silverado Resort and Spa, where all of the electrical systems in the hotel malfunctioned, including the electronic access doors forcing people to jump from windows because they could not leave their rooms to escape an approaching fire that instantly appeared out of nowhere in perfectly clear weather with no wind. It is very important to make note of the malfunctioning doors because a simple power outage will not stop those from working. Something jammed the circuits in the doors. Simultaneously, the hotel lost main power, and local battery backup. Not even the always operational emergency hall lights worked. That would be totally consistent with a massively potent EM weapon causing complete electronic malfunction, because not even the circuits in the emergency backup lighting that turn it on, which operate independent of everything off of a small battery right in the light itself. Not even circuits at the small level worked. First, the Cuba sonic weapon story. And folks, have you followed that story in Cuba? Well, let's talk about it. First, this Cuban sonic weapon story, and now this. Take these assertions at face value, and assuming them to be true, then yes, electrostatic conditions in the region, before the fires appear to have been highly charged. And it is worth noting, for the record, what many readers of this site are probably thinking. California is allegedly one of the hotspots for regular chemtrail spraying. Now let me stop there for a moment and tell you, I've been covering chemtrails for almost 15 years and telling you on the air that, when you look up in the sky, in fact, I was in Mexico the last few days, and I saw for the first time chemtrails here. I normally don't see them around Ensenada. But anyway, chemtrails, when you look up and you see all those lines in the sky, they're not from airplanes. Well, they are. But what they're spraying isn't good for you, and we've talked about that many times. But California is allegedly one of the hotspots for regular chemtrail spraying. It's also worth noting that chemtrails allegedly have a high mixture of particulate metals, which would increase the electroconductivity and semiconductor effect of atmosphere, as the author of the article points out. Indeed, some researchers have pointed out that chemtrail phenomena may be related to President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, since there is some evidence that this spraying began around the time that the USA seriously began plan for missile defense. Other authors have urged that the ionospheric heaters such as HAARP, by beaming massive amounts of broadcast power into the ionosphere, could release massive, guided electrical strikes in a region if the conditions are right for it, or if they have been carefully prepared. Could all this be possible? Of course it could. Weather manipulation isn't anything new. I mean, you can go back to patents in the early 1940s regarding how the military was, already experimenting and manipulating the weather. Recently, China spent over $3 million for weaponized electronic methods of controlling the weather. So they're doing it. It's just what we don't know that makes it an interesting story. But it's really a sad story because if you think about it, let's say they did control the weather and created these fires. How are you going to prove it first? First of all, it's a crime. 40 people have been killed. But how are you going to prove it? And that's the real key. It's the perfect weapon. Because blame it on the weather. Like I told you once before, if I had to pick a job the best job to get in the world is to be a weatherman, because you don't have to be right. For example, what happens one day when the weatherman tells me it's going to be a really nice sunny day, so I put on my nice suede jacket that I just bought for $300, and I take a stroll outside, not taking my umbrella because I trusted the weatherman. But before I could get to shelter, I get rained on and ruin my $300 suede jacket. Now, can I blame the weatherman? Well, I can call him and say, "Hey, what happened, man?" And he would say, "Well, it was the weather." That's the greatest job in the world. You can be wrong 100% of the time and still be a weatherman. But anyway, the greatest crime in the world could really be how to manipulate the weather, causing all of these tragedies. Now, back to Mr. Farrell. These are people trolling social media, perhaps, because they don't understand how things work, but perhaps not. And they are saying there is no way the air could have been so electrically charged that sparks would be everywhere because it would electrocute anyone standing in it. This is not true at all. Tesla proved this. There are lots of photos of Tesla sitting in a chair with an electrical storm around him, because it does not take much to make a show relative to what the body can take, because the body is a much better conductor than air. Additionally, the frequency at which the air is charged makes a difference. Once the frequency goes beyond approximately 40 kHz's, the body won't conduct it deeply due to an electrical effect known as skin effect, where electrical charges travel on the outside of objects rather than through them. All the unbelievable Tesla photos were the result of super high voltage, low current electricity traveling around the outside of objects due to the skin effect caused by that electricity also being at a high frequency. So, how would this start forest fires? And really, folks, if you think about it, the answer is an easy one. A dry leaf is thin, which eliminates the benefit of conduction via the skin effect. And 2, a dry leaf will try to be an insulator, which will force all of the electricity that flows through it turn itself into heat. And additionally, if the air is sparking everywhere, as some witnesses said, one of those sparks would probably set off dry tinder somewhere. Poof, instant fire. There should have been several cases of exploding dry trees where there was no fire there before at all. Again, all true. Electricity of very high frequency travels along the surface of an object rather than through it. Recall only for a moment Tesla's Colorado Springs experiments with his impulse magnifying transformer, essentially a Tesla coil, where high-frequency switches are opened and closed extremely fast, sending pulses of electrical acoustic waves not through the coil but over it, with the coil thus functioning in a different manner as a waveguide. But then this picture of the fire damage that I saw on Facebook, which seems to overturn all the above careful reasoning. The damage evident here would seem, at least in part, to contradict the theory of this proposed article. For notably, in the lower left corner of the picture that I'm looking at, a basically flattened, burnt-out building is quite close to a tree, which presumably should have burned as well in the intense heat of the nearby building. Also note what appears to have been a convenience store with gas pumps. The store is burned and the gas pumps are not. Assuming this picture is indeed from the damage zone, the damage does appear to be anomalous, exhibiting almost kind of a targeted damage, with the surrounding foliage in this instance left relatively unaffected. So what might cause this type of damage? Arson would certainly do it, though it would demand a rather coordinated effort, don't you see? But I can't help but think that perhaps we're looking again at a kind of resonance effect, a heat and electrostatic, electroacoustic effect that both melts and pulverizes. After all, arson would certainly do it, though it would demand a rather, like I said, coordinated event. Arson would not explain the other strange effects alleged reported in that article. In any case, we've seen that the heat and electrostatic or electroacoustic effect before you see the other side of the story. And here's a little tidbit. California fires and trees burning from the inside out. Now, when have you seen that happen before? As the California fires couldn't possibly be any stranger, one man took this picture of a tree burning from the inside out. I'm looking at the picture right now. It's incredible. Which might be possible if they absorb all of the metal particulate of the chemtrail spraying, acting like an antenna for ambient electrical and microwave energy pulsed into it. That we know can be done just from the HAARP experiments. And you know that they've advanced to the point where there are hundreds of these HAARP stations all over the world now. So, this happened in Sonoma County. Matthew McDermott was trying to get to town in Sonoma, California. He was a resident desperately searching for an escape route from the wildfires that had ignited the night before, that raced through parts of Northern California and began to surround the area where he lived. And I might add, I have a friend that lives up north, and he had mentioned a couple of his friends, getting the time now, it's now 4 o'clock in the studio, as you can hear by my new chiming clock. I have to keep track of the time sometimes. But anyway, a friend of mine who lives in Northern California in turn had a friend who was caught up in some of these fires, and he said it was the most amazing thing he'd ever witnessed. He'd lived there all his life for 50 years. And he said these things just came out of nowhere. You know, usually a fire, you can see it spreading and you have time. You know, I mean, if you're right in the area, you're going to have to move quickly. But he said these things were like popping up like boom, boom, boom. And that's why so many people are missing right now. And 48 people I heard, have been confirmed dead because they had no time. And so could this be what this article was proposing, that it was weather warfare? Of course it was. What else could it be? Well, I mean, if you ask anybody in the military, they'll tell you it's the weather. Okay. Now, this guy's trying to get out of his place. So he's leaving his house Monday as the wildfires ignited the night before and raced through parts of Northern California and began to surround the area where he lived. He'd been driving all night and was in the nearby town of Shelbyville when he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A tree full of fire. Bright orange and red flames flickered and flared, not from the outside, but from the inside, and you could see the gaps in the large tree trunk. Smoke poured out near the tree's top, like a chimney. McDermott said it was an unbelievable sight, and what was an unbelievable day as he crisscrossed the roads trying to find the best way out of a fiery madness. And he said this quote, "I've definitely not seen anything like this before in my life." He lives in Sonoma County for 10 years. We wanted to know the escape routes in case we needed them. The route to Paloma was open. I just stopped on the side of the road, and the whole ridge is on fire. McDermott said while he was out checking the roads, he bought masks. All the smoke from the fires has turned the air toxic in the Bay Area and passed them out to whomever needed it. He also said his parents and other relatives who live in the area are safe. And I'm looking at some of the images here of that tree, and it's just totally amazing to me. You know, we got about 5 or 6 minutes on this side of the break, and I want to turn to a next half hour. I want to turn to an article about 9/11 that came across my desk, and I wanted to get into it. It's about a book out called "The Strange Human Sacrificing That 9/11 May Have Been Responsible For," and the reason behind it. So we're going to get to that because you know that I've covered 9/11 for years and have said from the beginning that the government story is so full of Swiss cheese, or so full of holes, it's like a piece of Swiss cheese. And we know that. But you know now, 16 years have passed? And pretty soon it'll be out of the memory and the minds of people, and it'll go down in the annals of another one of those false flag events that people take for granted. And like Hitler once said, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. But anyway, back to these fires, which are interesting because I have, you know, it's a beautiful, I don't know if you've ever, a lot of you people that listen to my show never been to Northern California, but it's a beautiful, beautiful area, and I've traveled much of it. And to see it go up in flames like this, and to know that it's been perpetrated by the Vatican-led New World Order, is just a sad story, and too many people paid the price for this one. And just think about it. If you could prove that this was weather manipulation, it is a crime, it is murder. And who would be held responsible for that murder? Who? Well, it goes already from the top down. But do you ever think you're going to get to the top of the tree in this one? Never. Just like in any other crime. Just like in all the pedophilia crimes that are talked about in the news. It never really gets to the top. Never really gets to where it all starts. And you know that from my shows many times, talking to New York Police Detective Jim Rothstein, who's investigated these pedophilia rings for over 30 years. And the point is that these people that are causing these things, and I will go right to the top, to the Vatican, all roads lead to Rome, have a plan that isn't a good one, and we talk about it much here. And it's very simple. Control a one world order, a one world religion, and to get to that, you have to create chaos and destruction. And that's what they're doing right now. And they've done it for hundreds of years in other countries. It just so happens that the target is on the back of America right now. And that's why you're seeing a lot of what's going on in every aspect in our country. You're seeing the hatred between blacks and whites being reinstigated by certain people. You're seeing things happen in our foreign policy that leads one to wonder who's going to throw the first missile at us, this time. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy time to live, but I think if you put everything into perspective, it's better to know and to try to get at the real truth behind this than to be ignorant and be lied to. And, that old saying, ignorance is bliss, is not really true at all. Ignorance is the point, what happens? People just don't want to learn things anymore. Like, they don't want to get to the bottom of stories. They want to sit back, and I'm talking about 98% of American people, and do absolutely nothing and believe the lies over and over again. And if you do the same thing over and over again and you don't get a good result, what really is that? It's called insanity. And hopefully on this show, we try to give you a little bit more so that you can open up your mind a bit, research it on your own, and come to your own conclusions, like the story here in the fires. You may say, well, they were caused by the weather. Some people say they're weather manipulation. Well, I've given you some facts to make you think about it. And so once you do that, you're at least on the road to getting out of what I call the matrix, and getting out of the Vatican-led New World Order matrix, where they want to do really one thing: control your mind, your body, and your soul while you're here and when you leave here. That's why the Pope still, takes money for indulgences, for masses, for people that are in supposed purgatory, which doesn't even, what is purgatory? Something created by the Vatican-led New World Order. There's no basis in any kind of biblical story of purgatory. There's a place where you go, you're not yet ready for heaven, but you're not yet ready for hell, and they call it purgatory. Forget about it. I'm not going to that place. And anyway, we're just about out of time for this half hour. And I want to say, go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. You can get shows going back over 12 years in what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. Yes. So go right there. I'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. And I'm going to turn to a story that came across my desk. It's a new book out. It's called, it's about 9/11 as a mass ritual, stranger than first really understood. Remember the story I did, and we talked about how at Auschwitz and the other concentration camps, that many people felt that the people were gassed when they went in to take their showers. But there are reports that they were just put to sleep and were actually burned alive. And this story is similar. A mass ritual, a mass burning of live people. Investigative researcher author S.K. Bain has not only gone outside the box, he's exposed a much bigger and stranger box than anyone has posited before, taking the reader inside the minds of the power-mad psychopaths responsible for the new Pearl Harbor, or 9/11. And so I wanted to turn to that book and to go to the prologue and maybe tell you to go out and get it if you think it's any good. And I looked it over, and I wanted to just go over. It's the most dangerous book in the world, 9/11 as a Mass Ritual. And the prologue is going to be quite interesting. I want to read that. It starts out, knock, knock. It was inevitable that this book would be written. There is among conspiracy aficionados a kind of brotherhood. I use the gender-specific term brotherhood deliberately. It is a brotherhood buried alive. What does that mean? Imagine a person buried alive. Imagine yourself. You are equal parts alive and dead. You are in your own tomb. You feel the sensations of mortality with a keenness you never did before. Death approaches. Or maybe it has already arrived and you just don't know it yet. Edgar Allan Poe wrote about it. Most importantly, such premature burial is an essential part of the Masonic initiation ceremony of the third degree. To be ritually and symbolically slain, buried, and raised again is a feature of many initiatory programs around the world. From Siberian shamanism to quaint 19th century English secret societies. It is a liminal event. You're on the threshold of living and dying, and in the sacred spot you can see in both directions. Conspiracy theorists are kind of like that. They have one foot in the world of mainstream history and culture, what Robert Anton Wilson used to call consensus reality. That's the world where most of us live. We are all products of that world and of the ideas and worldview it represents. We are trained in this world virtually from birth. School, church, government, media, all conspire to present an image, a picture of reality that will result in the development of perfect citizens in an easily managed society. There is a social contract. We contribute to the society with the expectations that we receive goods and services in return. We obey the laws that are created by other people, believing that our best interests are being addressed thereby. We fight in wars declared by our governments in order to preserve our society. This carefully structured, albeit artificial society, and all is right with the world. But conspiracy theorists have their own foot. Well, somewhere else. Not everyone is asleep to the darker mechanisms of reality. In fact, everyone becomes aware of them at some point in their lives. Everyone questions the very nature of reality itself at times, so hostile to human life that human institutions must be challenged for their inadequate protection of their constituents. Conspiracy theorists seize on the inadequacy as evidence of a tenuous of consensus reality. There are other forces at work, forces that are unacknowledged by the state, the church, the media, because to admit their existence is to admit failure. Thus, when things go wrong, terrorists are blamed, or communists, or witches. This serves to rally the citizens around the government, and once again, instead of stopping to insist that explanations be given, the evidence is properly analyzed, and the guilty are apprehended and punished, and we once more go to war against someone somewhere. Paranoia becomes institutionalized. It is appropriated by government as its own prerogative. The state determines the nature and quality of the paranoia. It creates intelligence agencies whose sole purpose is to give a forum to paranoia, to enshrine paranoia as one of the necessary qualities of an observant and caring state, to prove that paranoia is an acceptable characteristic of the paternalistic regime. The citizens are not allowed to become paranoid unless it is at government direction and sanction. Individual cases of paranoia are frowned upon. The state tells us that if we are not paranoid the way it is paranoid and about the same things, it's because we don't have all the facts about terrorism, fundamentalism, communism, foreign countries, weapons of mass destruction, sleeper cells. The state has all the facts. Classified documents, wiretap transcripts, intelligence feeds, high-altitude reconnaissance images, none of which the citizen is permitted to see. It does not realize that the logical conclusion of all this paranoia is suspicion of the state apparatus itself. What the conspiracy theorist often fails to realize, however, is that those working for the state are often just as clueless as the average citizen when it comes to the origin or function of the forces at work to subvert it. The strength of conspiracy, after all, rests in the limited number of persons who are aware of the existence and parameters. No one has the entire picture. Each member of the state apparatus only has possession of a single piece of an enormous jigsaw puzzle. Putting together all these disparate pieces, particularly when one does not have the original picture to work from, is a soul-destroying enterprise that consumes decades of work and years of one's life. This is especially true when the state has its arsenal of lies, the techniques of disinformation and misdirection, of false testimony and planted documents. Anyone who works with this material eventually comes to the realization, but the motivation to keep digging is still alive. The urge to uncover one more piece of the puzzle, one more document, is perhaps a central characteristic not only of the conspiracy theorist but of human nature itself. The more intelligent of the theorists soon come to realize that Hansel and Gretel have left breadcrumbs everywhere in no discernible pattern. Thus, the inclination among some of the best to stop looking for the children and start looking for the witch. The deeper one delves into a conspiracy literature, the more one is struck by the tendency of some theorists to look beyond the documents and the tangible evidence of government malfeasance or political conspiracy to more transcendental sources of power. One begins with the government agents, the spies, the politicians, the military, and soon gravitates toward the secret societies, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, among so many others, and I may add the Vatican. This involves studying their texts, their social structures, their stated goals, their secret enclaves, their beliefs and practices. One has to come face to face with the occult if you want to get at the truth. A strange journey indeed from presidential assassination to an interview with the devil. Yet once one has made the leap from the normal files and documents stamped in government quarters, you go to different things. It all seems to hang together for a while. New sources of evidence become available. New testimony appears. Weird cults are seen linked to secret government machinations. George Washington was a Freemason. So was Simon Bolivar and Gerald Ford. What does that mean? It would be a 21st century Kabbalist to figure it out. Someone with knowledge of codes and decoding. Someone like the author, let's look at this. Someone like the author of this book, S.K. Bain. Someone who is observant enough to notice the details and to it would take someone like this guy who wrote this book, S.K. Bain, someone who was observant enough to notice the details most of us ignore, since we have not been trained that way, since we have not done reading enough to understand the secret societies. And I may add this. When I first went to Rome back in 1980, I was really unaware of what a secret society really was. And once I stayed there long enough, and I think I was there about 7 years, I started to understand it. And I learned it through basically being there, watching the people in the belly of the beast operate. And when we talk about understanding their symbols, their signs, they're all over Rome. When you talk about understanding their coding, that's what this is about. And when you start looking at, like I said, remember the story about Auschwitz and how most people in the history books think that these people were gassed to death in the showers before they were then put in wheelbarrows and put in the ovens. Well, some people have overlooked the fact that they weren't gassed to death. They were just put to sleep and then burned alive in the ovens. As some witnesses have recorded the horrible screaming of people as they woke up. So what was it? It was a mass ritual, a mass burning of people alive, a satanic element that we overlook, that we don't want to deal with. And what S.K. Bain is doing in this book is saying the same thing happened at 9/11. Now, there's discrepancies as far as how many people were really killed there, and whether it be 20 or 3,000, that whether it be 1 or 3,000, that's enough. Someone who is observant like this man needs someone who is versed in the Kabbalah, as in conspiracy, in Matria, as in government. It requires a new science, a new art, a new approach to old material. Furthermore, it requires a sense of conspiracy, may be transcendental, may have its origins in the unconscious mind of the state. The numerology alone is significant. Someone somewhere is pulling these particular quantum strings. These numbers are consistent, and sometimes they are either the result of conscious and deliberate series of acts by agents so powerful and unknown that a belief in the ultimate secret society is only one option, or they are evidence of the workings of even a darker force, and no one is in charge. This is where this author comes in. He notices things. He sees patterns in dates, names, places, and documents that most of us either ignore or can't see in our best days. I've stayed away from 9/11, says the writer of this prologue to his book, Conspiracy Theorizing, since there are already a lot of people doing that, and I have nothing of value to add to the conversation. That is not true with this book. What the author adds to an ongoing dialogue about 9/11 transcends the hideous events of that day and extends into other times, other spaces. This is a new material, a new approach to the conspiracy and cover-ups and surrounded that day alone. In the view of the mainstream media, changed everything. Although many of us know better, know that nothing had changed, know that it was the 20th century taking its logical conclusion. What is more, Bain develops his thesis with a rare sense of humor and style. This is not merely another angry diatribe about government complicity and corruption. This is not the work of a man who sees reptiles in human form or Jewish Masonic plots hatched in Czech cemeteries. Bain doesn't scream at you. He doesn't try to shout you down. Instead, his prose is written with a sense of astonished discovery that invites us in to share in his startling conclusions. Bain may very well be the 21st century Kabbalist we have been waiting for, and this, the most dangerous book in the world, may prove to be his best. As someone who writes about the ink between magic and politics, between ritual and conspiracy, I recommend this text for its revolutionary approach to the central political event of our recent history. Many times during reading, I found myself thinking of other connections, other links to earlier events, all suggested by Bain's Kabbalah. Whether or not you believe in conspiracy surrounding 9/11 is not really important. The nature of Bain's argument is such that you will find your mind expanded by new possibilities. The arcane potentialities lurking behind political and historical events. By choosing to see 9/11 as a ritual on a massive scale, we paradoxically may better be able to understand it, to accommodate its message on a psychological, even spiritual level as we approach the end of 2017 and the birth of a new era. You may be mystified by Bain's work. You may be frustrated, exalted, annoyed, confused, even relieved, but you may not be bored. Read it alongside the newspaper, the blog, and the television news and see what you come up with. See much of reality around you begins to shift and change in ways you would never have foreseen, all because he's challenged you to look at details, to notice numbers, and see beyond the official statements and the spin to the unseen patterns behind the great times that we live in. And, you're looking at, I'm going to go a little bit forward here, maybe read the first chapter or so for you. And looking at a number of things, he starts out, here we go, introduction. Let's read the introduction. Maybe this will get you into the book. And there's a quote at the beginning that says, "There are so many gaping holes in the official accounts of 9/11 that no plausible, coherent narrative remains, and until now we have been staggering forward as if truth about these traumatic events no longer mattered." Richard Falk, human rights lawyer. And I can add that let me just take this for a minute. I can add, I spent 2 or 3 years researching 9/11, spending time in New York. And I spent time interviewing many of the victims, the family members of victims, many of the first responders, many of the people who were the first and second people out of the people coming out of the buildings, many of the firemen, policemen. And my conclusion was basically, after years of research and checking out everything I possibly could, that 9/11 was an inside job. How it was done completely is hard to come to a conclusion. I mean, there are so many parts to it. However, you'd have to go back to some of my older articles to get a lot of the basic information that shows the factual account by the U.S. government was a lie. Now, he says here in his opening, Dazed and Confused, a maze of conspiracy theories. There are so many theories surrounding 9/11 that it's impossible to keep track of them all, much less sort them out and make any real sense of them. Which ones have possible merit? Which ones sound plausible, but have in fact been effectively debunked? From the patently false statement that nobody imagined the terrorists would use planes as weapons, to suspicious insider trading in the weeks and days leading up to 9/11, from the inordinate number of military drills taking place on 9/11, and much delayed response from the Air Force, to the heated warnings from multiple nations regarding suspiciously high levels of terrorist activity leading up to the event, from Bush family members in key positions in corporations responsible for providing security to the World Trade Center and Dulles Airport, to documented instances of FBI failing to follow up on field agent warnings. There are, in fact, so many suspicious circumstances, unexplained anomalies, misleading statements, official and otherwise, and outright fabrications surrounding 9/11, the detailed chronicling of which is far beyond the scope of this work. That is easy to understand why a veritable 9/11 conspiracy theory cottage industry has developed over the last 10 years. Now, I may add that one of the most interesting things I found out while researching 9/11 was all the people that were supposedly in truth movements that were actually working for the other side, to distract you, to give you false theories, to basically confuse so many people trying to get to the truth that you'd never get there. And luckily along the way, I did meet some truthful people. But I think his book is not going to go into all the little facts regarding what happened at the Pentagon, what happened in 9/11, Building 7, what happened in Shanksville. And it's going to go into really why. Who were these people? What was this assignment? What was this? It was more than just a new Pearl Harbor. There was a spiritual, occult, devilish reason behind it. And that's what I think he gets into. But anyway, millions of Americans are concerned citizens around the globe, have serious questions about the events of 9/11. And may I add this? Most people, look, as time goes on, if you remember that day, and I remember it well, it was my birthday, they had come up with the scenario of who did it, why it happened, that same day, an impossibility. But they never varied from that story to this day. And that is how a lie becomes the truth over time. Because you ask people now I remember when I was in New York right after 9/11, in the 2 years after, I would say 1 out of every 2 people you talk to knew that the government was lying. But again, every one of those people knew there's nothing you could do about it. And as years go on, the more people, the farther it gets away from reality, the more a lie can become the reality. And that's why many people, many kids growing up today, really will grow into that story thinking that the government is telling the truth. And really, outside of New York, I still think that the masses believe the government story. And it goes to show you how easy it is to get away with the bigger the lie, the better you can get away with it. But he goes on to say that, and why should they? Even the individuals in charge of the 9/11 Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. The 9/11 Commission have no confidence in the process or its outcome. Thomas Keene, former Republican governor of New Jersey, was the commission chairman, and Lee H. Hamilton, former Democratic U.S. representative from 9th District of Indiana, was its vice chairman. And I can tell you, I sat in on a few of these meetings of the 9/11 Commission when they wanted to have public meetings to explain their stance. And I remember running after one of the congressmen and trying to ask him a very difficult question, and he ran for the hills. I mean, they literally blocked me and the cameraman from ever getting close to him when we asked him a really hard question, something that gets near to the truth. But anyway, months after the commission issued its report and ceased functioning, Chairman Keene and other commissioners toured the country to draw attention to their recommendations, claiming that some of their findings and suggestions were being ignored. Co-chairs Keene and Hamilton subsequently co-authored a book about the constraints they faced as commissioners entitled Without Precedent, The Inside Story of the 9/11 Commission. So basically, that was a cover-up, just like every commission they create. They did the Kennedy assassination, the Warren Commission, the same thing. How about when a priest, a high-level priest gets caught for pedophilia in the United States, and the FBI wants to arrest him? What does the Vatican do? They airlift him to Vatican City, which doesn't have an extradition treaty, to Washington, D.C., and they say publicly, we will enforce the law on him. Now, will they? No. He'll be sent off to some monastery to play golf for the rest of his life. Now, released in 2006, this book chronicled their work, and in it they charged that the commission was set up to fail. Well, I don't care what they said. It was set up to lie and keep the truth from the people. And I sat in on 2 or 3 of those meetings, and I shook my head. And I know a lot of the victims, the family members of the victims, were shaking their heads even more than me. So anyway, a little bit about 9/11. Go to this book. The guy's S.K. Bain. You can find it on the internet, and then see what he has to say. But anyway, it's a long time ago. And what's happened since then? I mean, there's so much going on, it's hard to keep track of, isn't it? Well, anyway, you can try to keep track of it every day here on the Investigative Journal. Go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. You get shows going back over 12 years on the Vatican-led New World Order. And don't forget to hit that donate button, because we're listener-sponsored, and that's the only way we can keep the show going. Thanks for listening. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a good evening on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.